I'm excited to introduce our next panel. So it's called the Vanguard Forecast National Security Predictions of 2025. And we have a familiar face chairing this one. It's our fearless moderator from yesterday. Retired Lieutenant General Charles L. Moore was the Deputy Commander of the U.S. Cyber Command, Fort George, G. Meade, Maryland, from 2020 until 2022. He was commissioned in 1989 after graduating from the U.S. Air Force Academy. He served as an F-16 fighter pilot, instructor pilot, weapons officer, forward air controller, and instructor at the U.S. Air Force Fighter Weapons School. His command experience includes the 555th Fight Squadron, Aviano Air Base, Italy, the 332nd Expeditionary, you can tell I'm not military, I'm doing my best here, I'm sorry. You guys all know, you're like, yes, this is great. He's very impressive. See, you guys are like, why do they ask her to moderate this? This is what I was worried about. Anyway, I'll stop there and you guys can take it from here.
Thank you, Erin. Everybody enjoying day 2? Yeah. I am too. Yeah, we can clap. I also want to say Erin is doing a fantastic job. Let's give her a round of applause. Definite upgrade from yesterday, Erin, so I appreciate it. So I have the privilege of hosting the final panel here at our summit this year, and it is entitled The Vanguard Forecast, National Security Predictions for 2025. Now, we placed this panel at the end of the summit very purposefully because we want to pull on a lot of the threads that have come up and concepts that you can see right over there on Lindsay's board, which is fantastic, and orient ourselves towards some predictions for what we think we might see in the rest of this year. So to help us do that, we put together a panel of absolute experts, and we're referring to them as our diviners of the digital age, and no pressure. And I'd like to begin with allowing each of them to introduce themselves. So let's just start right to my left, and Will.
Sure, appreciate it. Awesome to be here. I'm Will Roper. I run a tech startup now in the AI space. Before this, I was at the United States Air Force as its acquisition executive, Space Force as well. Before that was a prototyper in the Pentagon, which is where I got to know Sue Gordon, and I don't remember anything that we worked on together. Lifelong the blue light does work. Lifelong aficionado technology. I'm proud to be here.
Sue Gordon, career intelligence officer. Ended my career as Donald Trump's principal deputy director of national intelligence, which is in fact the worst title. I know. Thanks, Gus, for having that look on your face. Yeah. Worst title ever. What it means is the senior most career intelligence officer. That's almost the COO of the intelligence community. And now, since retirement, I'm still trying to change the world for the better and ensure national security, this time focusing on companies so that they understand that they are, in fact, with the citizens, the national security makers that really make a difference.
So Peter Singer, I want to add my thanks and congratulations on the forum. I wear 2 hats. One, I work at a think tank and write on national security and technology issues. And then secondly, run a business called Useful Fiction that works with organizations, primarily in the national security space, on helping them to figure out how to tell the story of strategy, complex technologies, et cetera.
Thanks. Glenn Van Herk. You can read up there, Glenn Van Herk Advisors. I'm founder and principal of that, focusing on national security, working with a lot of companies doing artificial intelligence, machine learning type of work, the bottom line using data and information in the national security realm. Before that, I was a commander of United States Northern Command and NORAD, spy balloon, think about those types of things, tracking Santa Claus. Anyway, I just want to echo Chairman Green did an incredible job of conveying the landscape, and I would say if you were listening closely, it may be worse than he said with regards to Homeland Security and Homeland Defense, and there are significant challenges. I hope we pull that thread today.
Fantastic. Well, it is great to have all of you here. Now, as you know, AI has been the focus of this year's summit, and we've explored many aspects of that as it relates to national security. That said, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into several subjects here during our panel. And yeah, we're going to put you on the spot and ask you to make some predictions for the coming year. So that's going to be fun for all of us. So let's further set the stage real quick with a bit more global perspective. Right now, the world's very focused on Ukraine and how the president's efforts to secure peace is actually going to unfold. Additionally, after being thoroughly outgunned by Israel, Iran seems to believe that the only way to regain legitimacy and influence is through the development of a nuclear weapons capability. China continues to improve its traditional military capabilities, both in numbers and in quality, at an alarming rate, while rapidly integrating AI-driven technologies with the stated goal of challenging the United States, not just regionally, but globally as well. Economically, despite recent jitters in the U.S. stock market and trade tensions, we are navigating a period of cautious optimism, balancing underlying resilience and persistent global uncertainties. There also seems to be some realignment when it comes to alliances and partnerships. Traditional alliances persist, but they are being supplemented by new coalitions, such as increased Indo-Pacific cooperation, deeper European defense coordination, and growing security ties among nations concerned about cyber threats, AI, and supply chain vulnerabilities that we heard a lot about yesterday, especially with Dr. Miller's presentation. For the moment, these and the other situations tend to be the knowns, if you will, within this environment. But as history has shown, we rarely, if ever, correctly predict where the next national security crisis is going to unfold. So, of course, that's where all of you guys come in this afternoon. And we're going to focus on asking each of you to peer into this ambiguous and murky and ever-changing landscape of national security, help us navigate its uncertainties, and forecast some of the challenges and circumstances that you think are going to actually unfold. So with that as our backdrop, we're going to jump right into our questions. And as everyone said throughout the summit, right up there on the slide at the link, if you want to submit a question, it will magically appear right up here in my hand, and I'll be glad to pose it to our panelists. So let me start with this. From a national security perspective, there may be no more favored or utilized term than deterrence. In fact, the current U.S. national security strategy emphasizes deterrence as a central element of national defense. Additionally, the concept of integrated deterrence is a cornerstone of the current national defense and military strategies as well. Integrated deterrence involves using all the tools at the Department of Defense's disposal in collaboration with other U.S. government agencies and international allies to dissuade adversaries from aggression. That said, how do you see emerging technologies, such as AI and others, reshaping the concept of deterrence and warfare over the next year or beyond? And what new vulnerabilities do these tools introduce? And let me start with General Van Herk.
Great, thank you very much. So first, I think it's really important to understand deterrence. And people talk about achieving deterrence in a domain. Deterrence is about the gray matter, what somebody believes, whether they can be successful in achieving their objectives or the cost to achieve their objectives would far outweigh achieving their objectives. So I think that's really important. You achieve deterrence effects in different domains, such as the cyber domain. There's various ways to do that. Most people see that deterrence, when you talk strategic deterrence, view that as our nuclear deterrent. And absolutely, that is our foundation of homeland defense. Most people obviously focus on punishment, deterrence by punishment. I think where we can grow is deterrence by denial. And I'll give you an example of that. Golden Dome will be a deterrence by denial capability. It will create doubts about somebody being able to achieve their objectives in our homeland. So as the former commander of NORAD Northcom, I focused a lot on integrated deterrence and deterrent effects in our homeland. What I would tell you is the one thing I could never have enough of or give enough of to the Secretary or the Prime Minister in Canada was time and decision space. And the only way you create more time and decision space is you take the data and information and you process it faster and you disseminate it to key decision makers or those generating effects. And the way you process it faster is the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to help you do that. I'll give you a couple of examples. So every North Korean missile launch that they would fire, I would ask the question, did we have indications and warning ahead of the launch? And almost always the answer was, yes, we did, We just had not analyzed the information. So what is prohibiting us from putting artificial intelligence and machine learning on the satellite so that immediately once you take an image, that it compares that to historical data, it utilizes the algorithms to make an assessment, and if it's required, it downloads it immediately if in a position to do that. Today, we wait to download them oftentimes hours to days. Sue may correct me on this, and then we have to analyze them. So that's one example. Another example is in the spring of 21, when Russia did a head fake into the Donbass prior to 2022, when they actually invaded. We took the real data, not only military data, commercially available data, anonymized cell phone data. We ran that through the algorithms that we had generated at NORAD and NORTHCOM with our experiments called GUIDE that we started. We gained 3 days of decision space based on using AI and ML that the community got surprised with. Imagine what you can do with 3 days of decision space. For an operational commander, you can create deterrent options by posturing forces. If you're the president of the United States, it gives you the option to pick up the phone and say, we see this, don't do this. There are many things you can do. And I would just say that's one. Domain awareness is another. Oftentimes today, domain awareness is done in cylinders of excellence, if you will, and they don't analyze the raw data. The raw data is ripe for machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to process that. And I'll give you an example. In the 2015 timeframe, you may remember a gyrocopter flying down from the north part of the National Capital Region, landing on the Capitol lawn. Well, DOD didn't see that, NORAD, the FAA didn't see it, Capitol Police didn't see it, neither did Secret Service. But when you took all that raw data, which we went back and got, and you applied the machine learning to it, there that gyrocopter was at treetop level all the way down just by sharing data, no new sensors, and applying the algorithms, the capability to that. So you don't need a whole bunch of new sensors oftentimes. It's sharing data. Resilience in our homeland, strategic deterrence. And I'll stop here in a second, Tuna. Sorry.
This is great.
This is an important topic. My strategy really focused on resilience in the homeland. I wanted to be so capable, so resilient, that nobody would ever punch us in the nose because they knew we'd get back up and swing. I think AI and ML help us tremendously by being able to plan, where you can run thousands of Monte Carlo simulations on how to best posture your logistics capabilities or your defense capabilities in various scenarios so that you are in a better position to respond. Same thing for natural disasters. It can help us be able to figure out where the hospitals are, how many beds are in them, how many ambulances. If this bridge goes down because of flooding, what are the alternative routes? What is the cost of those? So much of that can be done just by simple artificial intelligence and machine learning with open source information that we have. Kill chain automation. Golden Dome is going to have kill chain automation. Space base, air for hypersonics. It's going to have it for the air counter UAS threat, and it's probably going to need it for the underwater. But the bottom line is the threat can overwhelm the human, and the machines can track and make recommendations. Now, I agree with the earlier panel. Decisions should be made by an individual, a human, all the time. And then supply chains, the vulnerabilities, the impacts. And so as you power project from the homeland, 80% of our force comes out of the homeland to fight a fight. 80% of that force resides on commercial infrastructure. It would be nice to know and have alternatives to the supply chains to those in real time, and just as important in the planning stages. Vulnerabilities, we got to be the first to get there. We got to be able to operate inside the OODA loop of any potential adversary so that they never feel like they can get a step ahead of us. If we allow them to get a step ahead of us, that's a significant vulnerability.
Fantastic. And I appreciate the specific real-world examples that you were able to provide there. And Peter, what are your thoughts?
I think it'd be interesting to apply this to your question to the decisions that are made related to deterrence. And think about it this way: leadership in war and even decisions of whether to go to war or not are shaped by what you might think of as a paradox of certainty. So leaders want certainty. They want confidence. And all the way, it's not just the decision at the top, it's how and why they train military officers and why we have field manuals and doctrine. Here's the situation. These are the SOPs. If X, then Y. And that's also how we used to train AI too, right? Yeah. But the paradox side of it is, in this quest for certainty, this love of certainty, they have to work and fight and decide in a world of uncertainty. Complex world, you have the proverbial fog of war that Clausewitz talked about. Oh, by the way, you have an enemy that's out there making decisions against you. And we heard it from the general, we heard it yesterday in the panels, particularly looking at the IDF. It's to go after this paradox is why we're turning to AI. Go through all the information for me, help find insights, help find patterns, help suggest to me courses of action, maybe even make those decisions for me. Now, that's great, but here's where something that we don't like to talk about, but the United States used to be really, really good at, which was deception. One of the great stories from World War II is the story of the Ghost Army that tricks the Germans into thinking that we're going to invade somewhere other than Normandy. So deception is the idea of basically tricking someone into believing something else and to act in a way to your own advantage. And deception campaigns have always been aided by the fact that humans, we basically can't help but to self-deceive. It's just baked into us. And now I get to the technology part of it. We're discovering the same things about the machines that we have built to train, advise us, make decisions for us. And so what I'd love to I think is a new area to explore is this idea of what does AI bring into deception as it relates to deterrence. So, think about the problems that we have all the possibilities, right? I don't have an AI product to sell you. So I'll talk about some of the problems too. We've got the hallucination problem. A lot of the AI just can't help but dreaming up things, and we often don't understand why it does it. Another is essentially the desire of AI to please, so to speak, the human. I think in a lot of decision systems, your best parallel for AI is it's like an overeager intern. It helps you a lot. It sifts through lots of different information. It has lots of expertise, but it also doesn't know what it doesn't know. And sometimes it doesn't know some things that are real basics. So if you're turning to the AI to make decisions, you still often need to vet it on sometimes the basic things. And then we finally have the fact of adversaries can go after your use of AI, including in deception campaigns related to deterrence. So they can go after it. We heard a discussion yesterday, great discussion about chips. Well, what happens? You can go into that aspect of it. You have the insertion of malware. You have going after the training data, polluting the pool that the AI is trained from. And then you have, in the fact, going after the sensor data itself. So AI, they're brilliant in a lot of different ways, but they can also be tricked by what they see, what they observe. And so I'll just end by, with a call for us not to deceive ourselves into thinking that AI is going to be the solution to deterrence problems.
That's fantastic. And hopefully some of the students were paying attention there, because I think there was a really good research paper topic or a topic for our Wicked Problems Lab there here in the Institute for National Security. Let me move on to this question. So as we all know, national security isn't just about military capabilities. In fact, Chairman Green this morning broke up the dime, diplomatic, information, military, economic aspects of national security. And there's even sectors of our society, such as the biomedical sector that we had a panel discussion on yesterday, that can affect the ability of our government to provide for the security of our nation, our citizens, and our way of life. Within this construct, and other than the military area that we just got a great discussion on, where is AI likely to have the biggest impact within the next year? And let me go to Sue.
I clearly need to pay you more in order to go to Will first, but I'll take it anyway.
I picked the right chair.
Yeah, man. So two, and then remind me to come back to kind of an overarching point. So in a digitally connected world, economic considerations dominate in some ways even more than political military. We are nationally less experienced at understanding how those forces work, not economically, but in a national security context. What does it mean in terms of decision-making? What does it mean in terms of intention? How do you see that? I mean, we have lots of data. We have tons of knowledge, but understanding of economic moves in the context of national intention, I think, is underexplored. And if we just look at this moment, boy, wouldn't that be nice in order to apply AI to some of those data sets from a national security perspective so that we can understand some of the second and third order effects or the real intention behind the action. Because, again, I'm totally biased because I'm an intelligence officer, but it is that moment of understanding intention that really allows you to go. So one is all the economic data we have. I don't think our national security community is as integrated, and I think AI could be used to help that in order to provide the same fidelity that we have over the years when I started on foreign weapons capabilities that then turned into all the things we could do. So that's one. The second, I mentioned this digitally connected world. I got to tell you, network maps aren't doing it for me. So I want to use AI to be able to do reconnaissance of the digital environment. Just as we did in the 1950s when we had to see beyond the horizon to understand what was going on. There is, in fact, a life and breath and pattern to what happens in the digital environment. There are choices being made that we just don't see because it's so massive and so volumetric. We don't know how to take the temporal phenomena and couple it with the action to be able to see the difference between truth and falsehood, not in terms of the content, but in terms of the reality as it is. And I don't know how we're going to get to deterrence or security if we can't see what massing at the border looks like. And if I would go beyond it, we are starting to collect so much data. We mentioned it in terms of what we ask for companies, but who's doing something with it to understand what's happening to each of us, to know what's happening to all of us. So I think that's another area. And then my last thing, and this is just a paid political announcement. I put so much pressure on the intelligence community to embrace this stuff because what intelligence really is about dealing with fundamental uncertainty and allowing other people to use it with certainty. Everything you talked about in terms of decision-making is you cannot wait for things to become an equation before you act. Every decision requires a leap. I think there's a craft in AI that needs to be applied in terms of how we do the same sort of, how do we see enough of it without judging it, to see clearly what it is so that we can come up with a framework that allow people to know that it's uncertain but still deal with certainty.
Great. Will, I did not forget about you.
I was just hoping I could say I agree with everything Sue said and just leave it at that.
I'd love to hear that because it has never happened in my whole life.
Well, we won't start now, Sue. I think the bottom, this is an appropriate answer because we're at a university, but I think that it's going to change the labor force and not just shift it overseas like happened in the first wave of globalization, though there will be some of that. You know, the first wave chased cheap labor markets, and I think we're getting close to chasing cheap inference markets. But I don't know, how many of you use a large language model like ChatGPT at least one time a day? Who's over 100? Yeah, I'm about 200 or 300 times a day. Who does any kind of fine tuning to where you're trying to take a language model and teach it to be you? It's powerful when you do that. At least what I see using it personally and then using it in my company is that I don't see that moment yet where I'm willing to let it reply to my emails. I'm not going to put my life in its hands, but I'm not a person anymore. I'm a team. I do have my over-anxious interns working for me, but I'm aware of what they know and what they don't know. That's on me. That's the burden of having interns, is you have to know how to get the value out of them and mitigate the risk. The better I get at working with this team of interns, the more proficient I become. But because I'm getting intern level output, arguably better, I don't need interns. And as I think about a lot of the skills that labor forces need, entry-level skills that are for building experience, where there is a lot of transactional elements to them, I see those going away. And I think it's going to be harder and harder for students who leave universities to find those early jobs where they're building experience and then what experience really matters. So I think we're going to see another volatile wave of globalization and also termination of certain skill sets. And the only thing that we can do to be prepared for it, both personally and professionally, is to really put the burden on people to know how to get the most out of their interns, their AI interns, and to not leave it at that, right? To keep pushing the bar up and up and up. And I don't think we exactly know where that's going to go, but I'm already seeing that now, that the need for entry-level talent is going away. And the more technical, the more precise, like writing code, things of that nature, that's where the language models really show their power, really show their proficiency for industry. So I think there's going to be a lot more of this ilk in the year to come.
Great, thank you. All right, next question. We are all familiar with gray zone operations, or operations below the level of use of force. In the gray zone, adversaries leverage ambiguity, deniability, incremental pressure to make it more difficult for us to mount a conventional response, or many times to even rally international support. Examples include cyber operations to steal billions in intellectual property, or to pre-position in critical infrastructure targets, repeated cyber effects against a variety of targets below the level of use of force, information operations campaigns like election influence in the US and Europe, the cutting of maritime fiber optic cables, China's maritime militia that's used to challenge freedom of navigation and land disputes, the use of proxy forces, etc. AI also presents an opportunity to act or affect the national security space in very asymmetric ways. In fact, it enables a lot of the things that I just mentioned. During this age of asymmetry, which adversary AI capabilities, whether from a state or a non-state actor, are currently being underestimated and could surprise the United States or its allies within the next year? Peter, what do you think?
There's a term that comes out of, we'll call it pop culture, called a frenemy. It's someone who is ostensibly your friend, but they're always bedeviling you. The United States has a frenemy problem. And that extends into not just the idea of there's a difference between when we go to war and those that go to war with us. I wanted to echo what the Representative Green talked about. I think we have undervalued our allies and those that have deployed with us and that were not attacked on 9/11, but bore cost all the way down to their soldiers dying on our behalf. Those are your true allies, and you don't want to treat them poorly. But I'm talking about those that we do protect, who buy our systems, but would not make that kind of commitment on our behalf. But I'm going beyond that to talk about those that sometimes create national security problems for us in other locations around the world that work counter to our interest. So we've got a frenemy problem, and one of the challenges that reverts back to this space is what frenemies are you going to not just meet? It used to be sell my weapon systems to, will they use them in ways I don't want them to? Now we have a, how deeply do I allow them into my new defense economy and my critical infrastructure?
Great. General.
So I think that we have woefully underestimated the manipulation of our society by folks intending to do harm. Cultural changes for our kids, for our grandkids, unknown how they're doing this through the information space. Perpetuating internal friction with divided Congress. Most of what you see in the news is not news, it's propaganda, oftentimes disinformation that turns into misinformation through AI manipulated photos, you name it. There's a lot, and that creates strife internal to our country. So we must all be aware of that. Be aware that that capability exists, and it doesn't need to be a nation-state actor. It can be any actor. It can be internal or external actor. I would say that we've probably underestimated counterintelligence activities and the ability to use AI and ML to counter, against us, especially here in our homeland, whether it's autonomous capabilities, platforms, undersea autonomous platforms. And the final thing is the ability for open source information to be analyzed much more rapidly, to have impacts on day-to-day operations that are ongoing. That's what I would think.
Great. Yesterday, I mentioned the president's executive order on AI, as well as the vice president's speech, where he laid out the 4 key objectives for America in this AI space. Make America the AI gold standard and do it in conjunction with our partners and allies. Work to alleviate bias and censorship from the models. Decrease the regulatory burden on the industry and make it about job creation and increasing efficiencies. At its core, these objectives seem to point to the realization that for America to continue to maintain its position as the leader of the free world, but also with the ability to protect our nation and its interest, the economic reality of continuing to remain the leader in regards to AI development and fielding must also be realized. You mentioned, touched on this, Sue. That said, and from an economic standpoint, if you had to make one actionable recommendation for our policymakers to adapt immediately, what would it be? Will.
Wrong seat this time, apparently. I've given this recommendation in the Pentagon on the Innovation Board, so I'll give it again here. Every time an AI leader from any company comes to Washington, their request is pretty simple. It's to have the framework for adoption, given the issues you just mentioned. And whenever we've had an infrastructure, AI is a new infrastructure, I think you can argue. We're going to build things on top of it. It's going to become, in a sense, a transport layer for other industries. I think we have to have the government help lead on that. So I think it's time for a Tennessee Valley Authority or a DARPA, or an organization that's given the challenge of safe adoption across the board. And until someone has that, everyone that has a mission that was born out of a non-AI imperative will see the potential for their mission through the lens of AI, but we'll have so many questions that will get very technical very fast about adoption that they're likely going to end up where the Pentagon has been, just kind of talking about it, but not walking about it. So I do think it's peculiar enough, it's technical enough that it needs its own focus and drive to adoption. And the litmus test is, when do we feel safer having an AI do it with a human than a human doing it alone, or maybe in some cases an AI doing it by itself. Without that, I think we're going to be here talking about why aren't we adopting AI more broadly, and we'll be still talking about the bias issues and training issues. So I think it's time for someone to take that mantle in government, create the organization, put an exceptionally capable leader, and give them all the authorities required to adopt and implement, and accept that there are going to be mistakes.
Great. Sue, what are your thoughts? I could tell you wanted to jump in there.
Well, one, super answer, so I'll try and be tight and focused. My first is, you wanted to use it. All those recommendations are about attributes rather than use. I don't know how you get to any state if you don't put it into action. And the second is, if we don't talk about risk, we will be scared of use, and we will impede ourselves from using things that we could use in areas where we do understand the risk to get there. And the last thought is, and it's a little bit about the conversation you all have, what's changed so much to me is it used to be that the government had the big ideas and then we told industry what to do. And so we knew it was important if it existed because we had driven it. One of the biggest problems we have now is the impedance mismatch between what the private sector can create that turns out to be important and the government's ability to insert themselves according to yours. So somehow closing that down, I think will help us.
Great, thank you. So no matter what aspect of national power and security that we're talking about, in order to be proactive and anticipate challenges and risks, certain assumptions about the future must be made. Of course, one of the challenges we're dealing with today is the rapid rate of change brought on by the advances in technology like AI and the decreasing costs and increasing availability. In fact, the Institute has just recently authored a paper called Shattering the Echo Chamber, where we argue about the value of red teaming and challenging the very things that so many folks believe are givens when we're dealing with these national security issues. So all that said, what is the one national security assumption that most leaders hold today that you believe will be proven wrong in the next year? And I'm going to go to Will first.
I think if you do make an answer to that question, you have proved you're not worthy of the question to begin with. It's really hard in this space to predict what is really a breakthrough across the board technology. So I'll give you a guess of something that really popped up for me anecdotally, but it gave me a broader insight. It was a fairly well capitalized startup that had made a breakthrough medicine design working with a major pharma company for Parkinson's, I believe, where the medicine could be made but not tested. No one had come up with a way to do a laboratory test, and they were explaining why, it wasn't COVID, there wasn't a crisis to get this medicine adopted, but there were no precedents for this, and that the FDA was really thinking about what to do about this. And I just looked at that, and then I thought back to the same thing that had come up with neural implants and other kind of bio-inspired things where the Pentagon is always, not even in the game, not much less behind the time. And I just thought about the regulatory and certification system that keeps us safe and operating, and how if we cross the Pacific to China, none of that's in place. And I've just never really heard of the adoption curve in the US being a soft, subtle enemy that's maybe antiquated and needs to be revisited if we're going to keep up. Because if we go to our forebears, there was a different risk tolerance in the time of the Soviet Union. And now we're in the time of China, and China has this soft power advantage. So I hadn't really crystallized for me until that moment, but it has, and so I put that out for you to think about. Is this an area we're not talking about, but we should be? What is our regulatory and certification system? What should it look like in the 21st century to compete? And where should our risk tolerance be as a society?
And even in the point of deterrence is gray zone is really ungoverned space, right? And so if you can't talk about the regulatory environment, that's going to be the place that our adversaries and competitors go simply because there is no structure that allows you to do that, and it impedes our actions too.
Yeah, really good point. Peter, you got thoughts, I can tell.
So you asked, what's a assumption that national security folks have that might prove false? I'm going to be provocative, and it's
Please.
both overall, but
provocative.
Aligns with some of the things we've heard in this conference. National security leaders believe that unicorns are real. Now let me break it down for you. Okay, so in fantasy, the unicorn's special power was that it heals everything. In finance, Unicorns are companies that you invest in and they make it big time, $1 billion valuation. Okay, so let's take that together and look at the defense economy. So I have to do the caveats. No one, and definitely Peter Singer, is not saying that the defense acquisition system doesn't need to be fixed, that the major companies have all sorts of problems, yada, yada, yada. Let's get that out of the way. Okay, what I'm getting at, though, is, and it's been like this awesome trend to see all this innovation coming in backed by venture capital. And I've been part of that. I'm on the board of one of these companies and the like. But, I'm someone who's like asked to peer over the next hill, and you asked me to be provocative. And so I think there's challenges that come in with this belief that venture-backed capital is going to fix everything in the defense economy and that they're all going to make money that we've got to grapple with, right? So, what are some of the things that we ought to talk about? One, where is the money allowed to come from? Where is it not allowed to come from? The NBA has more rules about the sourcing of funding than we now have within parts of our major defense economy. What percentage is allowed to come in from foreign or the like? Connect back to that frenemy point that I made. Where's your source of materials come from? Again, that's something that the old, boring companies have had to figure out. The new ones haven't yet, but it's not just for them to figure out. It's for what are we on the national security buyer side? What are we comfortable with? The lock-in problem. Remember when Uber came along and it was awesome and it was cheap. It was cheaper than everything. And then after they put others out of business, and most importantly, when their investors said, I need you to start making money, Uber stopped being so great. It also didn't offer a lot of competition, right? At the end of the day, we only have Uber and Lyft. It isn't like we got, the promise of everything else. But the last part that I'll get into is what happens if this all turns out to be a success? We still have to figure out the problem of the investor side of it, right? So $155 billion has been put into venture-backed capital in defense technology. At some point, those investors will want their money out, right? So how does it happen? Either through acquisition. So, it used to be in Silicon Valley, it's Google buys you, Amazon buys you, Meta buys you, okay? For the most part, those traditional big tech buyers are not going to buy the defense startups. In the defense world, it was Northrop, Boeing, Lockheed buys you. That's why it's Lockheed Martin, et cetera. The problem is the valuation of the new startups is actually so high, it's more than the big primes. So at the end of the day, there's not as many of these companies that are going to have the opportunity to be bought up. So the other alternative for the investor to get their $155 billion out is IPOs, right? Well, IPOs are at the mercy of a larger market. You might have seen, I think you described it as an interesting stock market. IPOs for anything are not happening, but let's say they do have IPOs. Now we get to the problem, the political problem of profit. So publicly held companies in the defense space, we know they have a rough profit margin of around 10%. Publicly held companies in the software space have a profit margin of around 30%. We do not know the profit margin of venture-backed companies in the defense tech space. When they go public, we will know that profit margin, and what will we, the taxpayers, think is okay? So all I'm saying is unicorns are awesome, they're really cool, but they don't simply solve all your problems. You got a lot of questions to figure out from them.
Great. Thank you, Peter. So we unfortunately got time for one more question. I have to get to this one. And I'm going to ask you each if you can keep your answer to about 2 minutes so we can get everybody in and we don't get the mic shut off on us. If you had to make one bold prediction, an unexpected national security event that will blindside the world in the next year, what would it be? How should our leaders prepare? And does AI have a role in preventing, mitigating, or accelerating this event? And I'm going to start with General Van Herk.
Well, great, thank you. So I kind of alluded to it earlier, and I'm going to give you 3 things, and it won't take more than 2 minutes, I promise you. So I talked about society being changed, culture, those types of things. I think we're ripe for some civil unrest being perpetuated through the use of external and internal actors that may catch us a little bit off guard. We've seen this in the past. We have a bold administration. We have folks out there across the globe and even here that are willing to take advantage of that to undermine our democracy. We have to be ready for that and understand that AI can have a piece of that by generating disinformation, misinformation, folks as well. The second thing I would say is autonomous platforms, especially what we're seeing in Ukraine, are going to expand. People are going to get their hands on them. Not only is it going to be a counterintelligence type of threat, it's going to be a threat. And I think it's more likely to happen in Europe, some type of a kinetic action, or God forbid, some type of a radiological or biological type of activity. That could be here as well. And the final thing I would say, and this has nothing to do with AI, but we're ripe for nuclear proliferation right now. The trust in the United States of America, and I'm not talking by our adversaries, I'm talking by our allies and partners. The trust is being undermined, and the environment's right for nuclear proliferation around the globe.
What do you think, Sue?
I want to talk about AI being applied to biological warfare. That what I think has kept it from being put into use, whether tactical or strategic, is that we haven't understood the coupling mechanisms. And so no one wants to employ a weapon that you don't understand what's going to happen. I want to say that that's a worry I have, but I think it's further out than 1 year. So what I'm going to say is, depending on how tensions go in the world, I think it's an easy call to say there will be a demonstration by a great power about owning the U.S. Technical infrastructure akin to what they did in Ukraine in 2007 by turning off the lights just to show that they had us.
Okay. Will?
Oh, and that's Susan M. Gordon, private citizen, not Susan M. Gordon with any responsibility for the U.S. government.
I'll give 2 predictions. One I hope is not true. First, I think we're going to see an emergent, mind-blowing achievement with agentic AI in the cyber-physical space.
I like that too.
We're ripe for it. You know, the world has been eaten by AI. There's not a lot of broadly available information left, but there's a lot of interesting cyber, physical, and industrial information that's held in industry. They know it. They're starting to train narrowly defined models to work in concert with the large language models. Agentic AI now has a lot of research. I think we're going to see something that, like ChatGPT 4.0 or DeepSeek, just kind of blows open the aperture of what's possible and makes us rethink. And the other thing, which is not related, but I've been on the front lines of Ukraine multiple times and keep going back. And I read often in Western media it discussed as an AI war, and I just haven't seen it there. I haven't seen any AI of any means on the battlefield. Humans are flying the drones, but it's the obvious conclusion when you're helping Ukraine is you wish you could replace what these capable humans do with AI, and you don't have to be a nation state, not even close to it. You can be 2 people in a college dorm room. Unfortunately, I think we're going to see something like that, where individuals take a lesson from weapons plus drones, and then adding AI allows me to do something that would have been a nation state weapon before.
Peter?
You took one of mine, which is a great one, but I'm going to echo it again, is that nuclear proliferation problems. I think so much of our discussion around the next potential nuclear power is about Iran, but there's many other nations that are greater possibilities, including the frenemy list and even the traditional ally list that were not there. And AI has, one, made that more possible. It doesn't take a Manhattan Project anymore because of advanced technology. And secondly, it's going to make arms control discussions about, there's a lot of interest in AI and keep AI away from nuclear weapons. It's a hard enough discussion between us and China. Now when you add in a bunch of other actors, it gets more complicated. I'll end on the other idea is some kind of hybrid attack involving cyber attack and information operations. We saw Colonial Pipeline was a hack, but it was the hysteria about the hack that gave it its effect. Well, I think actors have learned from that, and going back to what we heard from Will and others, AI's gotten so sophisticated in terms of not just going after vulnerabilities, but making real falsehoods that I think we're going to see hybridization of that.
Great. Well, we are unfortunately out of time. You guys nailed your time on target, so I appreciate that. Let's give all of them a round of applause, please. Thank you.